Okay. Can you all see my screen okay? Yeah, good. I don't know if I'll be able to see hands go up because I'm only working off one screen. So apologies if I don't see your hands go up, so but do feel free to interrupt. So yeah, I'm going to be looking at project planning today. I'm Michael Reid. I work for Inspire, same as Ian last week. I'm Ian's deputy. I think Ian would describe me as the person who attempts to turn his strategy into action and make it work on the ground, which is often challenging, but at the same time it's exciting. No 2 days are the same. It's challenging, as I say. And in terms of projects, my experience of those is around, I've delivered something for D2N2 with Flexible Learning Fund a few years back, which is quite a big project involving D2N2, so it involves quite a lot of stakeholders and managing people from different organisations. And I know Ian talked last week about different approaches to managing projects around hierarchical, matrix, functional, and so on. And managing people from another organisation in terms of that approach, sort of project management approach, can bring challenges, but it was a good experience. I've also done quite a few smaller projects within Inspire, things like bringing in new qualifications, new buildings into the service. So I've quite a bit of experience of project management, and like most people, I did the project management before actually learning about project management. So I went ahead afterwards and got the APM, the level 5 project management qualification. It enabled me to put a lot of theory into the practice that I already had. A bit like people who teach, a lot of people teach and then get the qualification afterwards, certainly in FE, but that's fine. So that's a little bit about me. What I've got here is similar to what Ian did last week. I've built basically on his presentation. So we've got a series of slides. There'll be some probably individual activities, given that we can't do breakout rooms particularly effectively within this. So the first thing really is to look at the session 1 recap. Just going to go to start this slideshow from the current slide. Recapping on last week by going through some of the quiz questions that Ian asked you to do. He may have asked you to do them. I don't think he put pressure on to do them. I think he gave you the choice to go through those. So we'll just go through those quickly to start with. So I'm just going to rewind a little bit, just as a recap. Did anybody get the opportunity to do the questions at all? Okay, that's fine. So as I say, just to recap on, there's 10 questions. I'll go from them really quickly. And the thing is with the questions, sometimes it's just about picking the best answer rather than only one being correct. You can often argue various answers. So which of the following statements about the role of the project sponsor is false? So 3 of those would be true. The project sponsor is an advocate for the project and the change it brings about. The project sponsor writes and owns the project management plan. The project sponsor is able to work across functional boundaries within an organisation. A project sponsor is prepared to commit sufficient, need to move Andrea out of the way, time and effort to support the project. Anybody want to hazard a guess on that one? Oops. It's fine if nobody is 100% confident on knowing the
answer. I think it's B, that actually that's the project manager role that writes and owns the project management plan.
Spot on, yeah. So the other 3 you would expect the project sponsor to be very much involved in, but not necessarily the project management plan. They might sign off the project management plan, but they won't normally be involved in writing it or owning it. I think Ian touched on last week, different organisations, different sized teams, different levels of experience of project management. You might take on different roles within the project team, but this is very clearly about the project sponsor, and B being about the project manager. So number 2, which statement best describes the responsibility of the project sponsor? Monitoring progress and use of the project resources, analysing the project team's productivity, ensuring the benefits of the project are realised, or planning project evaluation reviews for lessons learned. So it's best. Sorry.
I would potentially say all of them would be the project sponsor role.
And that's the thing with these questions. You could argue pretty much all of them. So it's about which statement best describes a responsibility of the project sponsor. And I just need to make sure I'm giving the right answer, because you're right. I can't actually see is it Stephanie, who said that. The best description would be ensuring the benefits of the project are realised. So it's really the project sponsor's role to make sure that the benefits of the project are realised throughout the whole of the project life cycle. You would expect the project manager to carry out most of the other roles. They would monitor progress, they would analyse the team's productivity, they would plan project evaluation. That would be the project manager's role. The project sponsors to ensure the benefits are realised. What is a key role of the project manager? Coordinating the development of the project management plan, conducting benefits realisation reviews, reviewing progress against success criteria and checking that the planned business benefits will be achieved, authorising any changes to the business case. So it's again, what is the key role of the project manager? And you could argue they have to do most of those, but the key role,
I think it's A.
I would say it's A.
yeah, perfect. It's the project management plan. They write that, they coordinate it, develop it, get it signed off by the sponsor and the steering group or the project board. The group whose remit it is to set the strategic direction of the project is commonly known as the project management team, primary users, steering group, suppliers.
Team.
Sorry?
Sorry,
So
the team.
it's so the answer to this one would be the steering group. This is around the strategic direction of the project. So the steering group would come together with the project sponsor and the board, possibly project management, they come along as well. So it's really about them setting the strategic direction of the project. The project management team would deliver that. The users are there to maybe talk about the specification. The suppliers are there to supply. So it's the steering group who are there to set that strategic direction with input from all of the others. So the stakeholders that are likely to form the main part of a project steering group or board. So this is what makes up the membership of that group. So I'm just going to make sure I've got the right answer. I don't want to tell you the wrong answer. So yeah, we're looking at C here. The sponsor would definitely be on the steering group. We'd expect supplier representatives. We'd expect user representatives. The user representatives are there to make sure that what they get at the end of the project is going to be what they asked for. We're going to talk a little bit about quality later, but they need to be kept informed of progress. Who in the project is responsible for benefits realisation? So realising the benefits at the end of the project life cycle. The senior management team, the project manager, the sponsor, or the end users. These are quite hard, but they're there to make you think rather than.
Michael,
Yep.
As part of the co-design process, I kind of want to translate this as we go into voluntary sector speak, and Ian's shared a glossary, but this is why it's important to tailor this to the voluntary sector. So
Okay.
would you mind just going back to the previous slide, just one moment?
Yeah, sure.
Thank you. So project management methodologies came out of the private sector, and you often see private sector language. So, and I'm sure colleagues know this, but we don't know who will be watching this later. So just want to clarify that in terms of supplier representative, when we're not producing products, it's a service. Actually, what we're talking about there are usually our partners, delivery partners. And they may be contracted providers within a supply chain arrangement or consortium, or they may be equal partners in a consortium. But mainly, we're talking about partners there. And then user representatives, that's a bit more obvious. That's our beneficiaries, our ultimate beneficiaries. Local populations, volunteers, service users, whatever we call them in our own organisations. But I just wanted to translate that because yeah, the language is often.
Okay. Yeah, thanks. I'll try to keep bearing that in mind, Andrea, as I go along. I've tried to do that with the slides, but it's trickier with these questions. So in terms of the benefits realisation at the end, who's responsible for that? We would expect it's C, the sponsor is there to make sure that the benefits realisation through the management of the project manager, of course. The following roles is primarily responsible for defining goals and creating vision for the operability of the project's outputs. A project sponsor, a product owner, a user, or a business case owner.
And again, I'm going to chip in and say
Yep.
sometimes these are the same people, but theoretical answer is fine, and hopefully we all know this.
Yeah, so that'd be the product owner. So they would specify again what that is in terms of the quality and the expectations of the output of the project. These next ones pretty quickly. PMO, we probably won't be looking at having PMOs in the organisations that we work in, the project management office, unless it's a larger organisation. PMOs probably won't be something we have. So when the majority of PMO functions are delivered under the control of the project, programme or portfolio manager, I don't know if Ian talked about projects, programmes and portfolios last week, this could be described as a central PMO, an embedded PMO, hub and spoke PMO, or a matrix PMO. For those that are interested, it would actually be B, it's embedded PMO, but let's not focus on that too much. If you did the quiz and you want to know if you're right or wrong, it's B. Number 9, when effectively implemented, what is one of the key roles of governance? So I don't think Ian talked much about governance last week, and it's not something we'll touch on a lot. So again, I won't spend a lot of time on this, but for those who want to know the answer, it is C. So the key role of governance is to provide confidence to all stakeholders that projects are being well managed and the most appropriate financial and technical controls are being exerted. You could argue some of the others as well, but C is the key role of governance. And for governance, it depends on the makeup of your organisation and how you're if you have directors or if you have people on a steering group, that will obviously depend on BCVS and any other organisations that you're working in CVS. Number 10, governance could be best described as, so governance, again, really quickly, it'll be A, the framework of authority and accountability that defines and controls the outputs, outcomes and benefits from projects, programmes and portfolios. So you'll often find that you might have 3 monthly meetings with the board within your organisation to make sure that there's some sort of accountability there. Okay, so that's the quiz. Ian did a conclusion. I won't go through that again. You could always watch the video from last week if you wanted to go through that. So project planning. There's the answers. What we're going to look at in the session today, scope and the project management triangle. So they're quite important. We're going to spend a lot of time on that, and also schedule management, really a bit important. It's probably the most useful tool of project management, is schedule management. Gantt charts you might be familiar with. We're going to look at risks and issues and how they are essentially very similar. We're going to look at quality, procurement, a little bit of procurement, change, control measures, what happens if we want to make changes throughout the life of the project, communication, really important, information and reporting requirements, and health and safety. So they're the main things we're going to touch on today. Scope, I don't think this was talked about a lot last week. It kind of fits between what Ian talked about and what I'm talking about. So it's really about making sure right from the outset what's going to be included in the project, what are the deliverables, and quite importantly as well, it's also about identifying what isn't going to be included in the project as well, right from the outset, because sometimes, depending on the type of project that you're attempting to do, it's not always that clear exactly what's included. So if you look at bringing in a new IT system, for example, you've got hardware, you've got software, you've got the Wi-Fi, you've got all the infrastructure behind that. What is it we're actually seeking to change here? Are we looking at the Wi-Fi? Is it just the hardware? Are they linked in any way? If you're looking at doing some sort of volunteer coordination, what does that include? Who is involved? Who isn't going to be involved? So it's really clear. It's really important that that's clear right from the beginning. So that moves on to the second bullet point there around the project and initiation stage. Project managers need to be aware of scope creep. We'll talk a little bit about scope creep throughout the project lifecycle, and they need to consider that as a risk. So we'll come to risk, we'll come to issues a little bit later. Scope creep is a risk. There's always a chance, and it's actually quite likely, that there will be scope creep. Moving down to that final bullet point, just to define what scope creep is, it's adding features, adding functionality, could be removing features and functionality, which is less of a risk, without addressing the effects on time, cost and resources, or without customer approval. So we're actually going to go back a little bit and talk about something called the iron triangle. It's something I wasn't actually that familiar with, but it makes absolute sense when we're talking about projects in terms of cost and time and quality, and how those three things are very closely linked. So any kind of scope, any change to scope, the project manager will usually need to take that to the project board, because it will usually have an impact on either cost, on quality or time. It's going to affect one of those three, very likely. And that's for the project manager to consider. So the iron triangle is also known as a triple constraint of project management. And it looks basically like this. So the three key factors within project management are time, how long it's going to take, that's something we have to consider, how much it's going to cost, and the quality, the product at the end there, really, really important. And when considering those three, we can look at it in another way. So right at the top of the triangle, we could get things done really quickly if we wanted to. But if we wanted to get them done quickly, it's probably going to cost us more, and the quality might suffer as a result of that. The bottom left, cost. We can reduce cost. But if we want to reduce cost, it might take more time, and the quality might suffer. Bottom right, we've got quality. We could go for high quality. If we're going for the highest possible quality, it's probably going to take more time, and it's probably going to cost us more. So the triple constraint, the iron triangle, is about balancing. And the sweet spot is going to be in the middle, probably. It's just to understand that triangle a little bit more. You've got the tips, but then you've got the sides as well. So sort of the top left side, you could go for low costs and quick, but the quality is probably going to lack a little bit. On the right hand side, you could go for something that's going to be fast, and it's going to be good as well, but then it's probably going to cost more. You're going to need to put more finances into the pot. And at the bottom, we could go for something that's going to be low cost, and it's going to be high quality as well. But something has to sacrifice there. So the priorities might be lower. It might take longer to get done. So it's always useful to have something like that in your mind when you're thinking of what you're attempting to achieve. And scope comes into that. So this is where scope could change. If we bring in additional scope, it's either going to take longer, it's going to cost more, or the quality is going to suffer as a result of that, which is why it has to go to the project board. Has anybody got any examples of where they've been involved in a project and it's really clear at the outset what the objectives of that are, how long it's going to take, how much it's going to cost, who's involved, and then somebody has a brilliant idea, why don't we add this? Has anybody got any examples of that working or not working?
Sorry, I put my hands up before you asked that question, and really interested to hear colleagues' thoughts about this. I think this concept and model is one of the most useful things you can learn about project management. Like I said, it's really very, very closely related to scope, which sounds in abstract form like, I think of a polite way to say management speak. But scope is really, really important. And the bit of co-design here that I want to feed in is scope creep is massive. It's a massive issue and risk in the voluntary sector, because within the stakeholders we work with, funders are a critical stakeholder. And when funders, the people who are paying your salaries, come back to you, say, we just want you to do X as well as A, B and C. Often our organisations can't say no. But if we have this framework and we have clarity about the original scope, then renegotiate with them if needed, and or internally at least have that conversation around what is going to get hit here in terms of time quality. Colleagues will know I'm a big fan of quick and dirty when it's appropriate, which is but making that judgment about what needs to be maintained is hard. I was just going to reflect that back in terms of, again, the co-design process. And if any colleagues here similarly make observations, please do feed it in, because this is the point of this, that we're turning this into something that's very voluntary sector friendly and meaningful.
Okay, thanks, Andrew. That's really useful. Does anybody have any examples? I mean, quick and dirty is a phrase I've heard quite a lot, especially recently when time is really squeezed. Quick and dirty, so the quality isn't great and it's fast. So the time there is the one that kind of takes priority, low, short on time. Any examples? It would be really useful if people could share any examples. Okay. Oh, Rachel.
Yeah, I've just thought of one. So we've just recently completed a cost of living booklet for the sector, for like locally, for people, with all the information on about all the different cost of living help that there is available. And it's the best it could be in the time that we had, but it is something that had to be out quickly. So obviously if we'd had longer, then we would have made it better. But for what it is really good. But it is an example of sometimes things that are happening in the world, like the cost of living, the people needed the help straight away, so we had to get it out as quick as we could.
So it's about prioritising. So you did it in good time, and the quality was good as well. Cost was cost an aspect, or was this because staff were employed anyway? They had to shift
Cost
priorities.
Well, it was my time and then various other people's time within the organisation that helped pull the information together. So it did take quite a lot of time, to be fair, because we had to do it so quickly. We had to sort of get it out and get it done. So yeah, it was quite time consuming.
Maybe having to drop other things. Sorry.
Apologies, I was forgetting to put my hand up. It's a really good example though, Rachel, because we could have, if it was going to be something that didn't date and become out of date quickly, we could have invested a lot of time in an external design agency making it look more glossy and fancy. But that judgment was made quite carefully because it would need to be updated, and really good example.
Okay, thank you, Rachel. So yeah, as Andrew said, that is really useful. And when I did my project management training, this wasn't part of that. And I did the APM level 5, literally front cover to back cover, and this isn't talked about in that at all. So yeah, I'm glad that I added it, because it does sound like it might be useful with the CVF sector. So yeah, we're going to move on to schedule management, and this comes back to the Gantt chart that I mentioned earlier. And there are different types of Gantt chart. This one here, I'll just quickly go over this one. We can see that we've got something that starts probably week commencing 2nd of January and finishes week commencing 24th of April. And we can see here it's kind of a generic, looks as though it's kind of a product schedule where we start the project for a couple of weeks, we gather the requirements for a few weeks, we build the system 4 weeks, system testing it for 3 weeks, user acceptance for 2 weeks, and integration testing for a week, and then system go live for 2 weeks. So I think it's a very simple example of a Gantt chart, whereby we've clearly got one line. We'll come in a minute to talk about the parent tasks and child tasks and something called a work breakdown structure, which is more sort of project speak. But here we've got a very linear approach to a project. It goes in sort of one direction. But unfortunately, project management isn't normally as straightforward as this. So next, I have a more complicated example. There's only ever one parent task. So when we talk about parent tasks, that is essentially, what are we aiming to achieve overall? Are we building a house? Are we coming up with a new data information system? Are we delivering some new learning, a new course, or coordinating a new project? There's only ever one parent task. But that parent task is usually broken down into child tasks. So for example, if we are planning to deliver a new course in September next year, that's the parent task. The child tasks are everything associated with starting that course in September. The marketing, the venue, the tutor, the resources, so on, so on, so on. These are all different child tasks. So there we've got the work streams, work stream 1, work stream 2, 3, and 4. Then within each child task, so if we need to have a marketing and communication plan for the new course that's starting next September, there will be work breakdown structures within that, work packages within that. So for example, if that's work stream 1 for marketing, you've got different types of marketing that you can do. You can do advertising boards, bus stations, online, social media, engaging with community groups, for example. Some of those can run independently of each other. Some will be dependent on something that's happened previously. And there we can see we've got work stream 1, 2, 3 and 4. This goes from Q1 of 2020, takes us through to Q4 2021. So this is an example of a 2 calendar year project. We can see there which is the longest work stream. So we've got work stream 1, which ends 3 quarters into the project. Work stream 2 starts in Q1 2020 and ends in Q4 2022. Work stream 3 is in the middle. Work stream 4 starts the week after work stream 1. So I'm going to talk a little bit about something called critical path of project management. The critical path of project management is normally the work stream that needs to start the earliest in order for it to finish on time. So work stream 1, for example, does it matter if that's delayed by a quarter? It appears as though it doesn't matter if it's delayed by a quarter because it'll still be done by Q4. Work stream 2, there's no wiggle room at all within that. So if we think about building a house, for example, we can't get the people doing the joinery or the plumbing right at the beginning. We can't do any of that until we have the foundations laid. And then we need to get building control to come and check the foundations before then we can start laying the bricks. And then they can't start putting the roof on until the bricks have been put up to a certain height. So thinking about building a house, there are certain tasks that have to be completed before the next work stream, the next fixed delivery 2 in this example, can start. So schedule management, when I've been involved in project management, I think for me this is one of the most useful aspects in terms of the tools that we can use. And I think Ian talked last week and there was a little bit of mention of proprietary, I struggle to say that word, project management systems sort of around Prince2, Agile, all those sort of paid for approaches to project management. What we're talking about with APM, the Association for Project Managers, and what we're attempting to do within these 4 workshops is give you the ideas behind the tools, but to be able to use free tools, be able to use things you've got access to anyway. So for example, with this one, you can use Excel and to produce something like this. We're going to have a go at doing this because I want to make sure this workshop isn't just about me talking. I'm not as good as Ian as doing that. I'd really like you to be getting involved in having a go at doing some things for yourself as well. So I'm just going to talk about this a little bit more, and then I'd like you to think about a project that you've either done, that you're either doing, or that you will do, and thinking about the schedule management and the parent task, the child task, and the different work packages as part of that. So I'll just give you a bit more input into that before I ask you to do that. Any comments so far? Sorry, I can't see hands because I'm only on one screen, so to interrupt.
It was just me, and this is specifically for BCVS colleagues. We have a core or standard workstream structure that runs across our organisation and projects. It doesn't mean they can't be changed where they're not appropriate, and they're not always relevant to all projects, and there may be some missing. But just want you to bear that in mind in terms of thinking through the workstream structure as we go into an exercise.
Okay. Is that something that's worth sharing as part of this, Andrea, or outside of this?
I don't mind sharing it quickly, and I won't be able to remember them all, of course, but they reflect the controls within most project management systems and the different aspects. So we have governance, we have marketing, we have quality, we have finance, we have evaluation, we have sustainability, inclusion, diversity and equality, all as separate work streams, and then some more. But they're common work streams within most projects and most voluntary organisations. So it's just useful to have that as a standard way of planning and managing activity, so we can compare apples and apples.
And is that almost a kind of checklist to make sure that anybody who is involved in project management don't forget about those aspects? doesn't forget about those.
Yes, I would hope it will be used in that way going forward with this additional knowledge about why we're doing things in.
Okay, thank you. So just a sort of bit of imagery and illustration of how this is put into a Gantt chart to start with, because you wouldn't normally just open Excel and start populating all of this. That you wouldn't start by doing that. You'd start by producing something that's in project speak, known as a work breakdown structure, or WBS. I know people who work in projects, and when I talk to them about work breakdown structures, they say, what's that? And they've worked in projects for 15 years. They just do it. They just do it. They don't really use a terminology even when they're involved in projects. It's just a tool that they use. So parent task, child task. So I think what Andrea, you were talking about there, in terms of the workflows and the way that you manage projects, the child tasks are some of those examples. We talked about marketing plans, communication plans, sustainability, perhaps EDI as well is usually an element of that. And within those child tasks, you've then got subtasks and work packages. Work 1.1.1 is a work package. 1.1.2 is a work package. So in our sector, we're often going to be having to include something around comms plans. So that could potentially be child task 1, and you might have a different owner of that task. So in the example, I know we've got somebody here today who's from marketing and comms, might take ownership of that task, reporting into the project manager on a fortnightly, weekly, an agreed frequency, really. So within that child's task, you then have subtasks. So like I mentioned earlier, you need to make sure you've got online marketing. You might have radio, media marketing. You might have engaging with other CVS, other kind of delivery partners, so that they'd all be subtasks. And for each of those subtasks, you then have work packages. So the work package, for example, in that example, might be, we need to have a social media post about this parent task. So before you do that, before posting it, you might need to think about paid advertising. You might need to think about design. So these are the different work packages leading to the completion of that subtask. Similarly with leaflets, for example, you might decide, I'm going to produce 5,000 leaflets and these are going to go across Nottinghamshire or the district. And in order to do that, in order to have this done by July the 1st, I need to make sure that they've been delivered. Prior to that, they've been printed. Prior to that, they've been designed. So all these are different work packages that would then inform the Gantt chart. Any comments? Okay. So yeah, a completed work breakdown structure will help to develop the Gantt chart. It's really useful just sit at a desk, make some notes, talk to some people just about identifying what those different work packages are. So I'd like to have a go at doing that for 5 or 10 minutes or so. So the next bullet point, have a go at completing a basic WBS, work breakdown structure, for the design and delivery of a new course. It could be planning an event. It could be putting together a new building, a new way of working within your service. Have a think about, what is the parent task? What are we attempting to achieve? What is this project going to do for us at the end? What are the child's tasks? And then within that, I think I've given examples around marketing. So hopefully you can take that example and think about how that would apply to different types of projects. What are the subtasks and the work associated with each of these? Andrea, I was going to suggest that people could just make notes, handwrite notes, or on the computer, just 5 or 10 minutes to do that. What are your thoughts on that?
I think. Sorry, I'm just thinking about the recording as well and how that will go down in terms of people.
Can we pause the recording?
I'm not sure.
Right. Okay.
So we might have to say fast forward the next 10 minutes. So yes, that's probably the only way to do it. And the reason we're not using breakout rooms is if you do that, you can't record them. So again, it's voids within a recording for online.
I just don't want to be, for me to be talking for 2.5 hours. I think
No,
people
I think
actually
that's
do.
really good, and perhaps for those in the building, get together with somebody and do it if you want, but make it something that's of use to something you've got to do soon or shortly, imminently. Start to think about real be more meaningful.
Yeah, it could be post-it notes with the different child tasks on each post-it note, for example. It could be something you use on the computer, just making some notes, just handwrite notes. So if we say 10 minutes, is 10 minutes long enough? Yeah.
How long's a piece of string? But yeah, I think we should set it at 10 minutes. Is everybody clear though? Because I know there's a lot of new jargon in there, what you're doing.
So think about the parent task. What is the project? And for that project that you're seeking to achieve, what are the child tasks within that?
Would it be useful for you to keep this previous slide on the screen?
This one?
Mm-hmm.
Could you,
Yeah.
Sorry, is everybody clear? Because if they are, I won't labour the point about what's needed. Or do you need an example again to talk you through what we're doing?
I think I'd appreciate, sorry, I've gone off camera because I was standing up, a quick example, because I just suddenly jumped to planning an event, and rather than, I'd found that a bit easier than planning training, but would that be the right approach? Just
Yeah.
as an example.
Yeah. So planning an event is absolutely fine. So the parent task would be the event. You know, what is the event? Have you got an example of a specific event, Lucy?
Well, we had a really good event yesterday, and I was just thinking, you know, like when you recap and you know, everything's good in hindsight, but it's kind of thinking what the event was. We did a launch of an office that we got a presence in, and it was just thinking it through that way. If I was doing it again, or if I was doing it, just because when you've just done it, it's fresh in your mind, isn't it? So is that, you know, like, why are you going to do it? Think who's going to do what, and just that's my approach. Just my thoughts there.
So who's going to do what is essentially what we're looking for these child tasks and these work packages to be. So if we're planning an event, a launch of a new office, for example, we need to think about all the different aspects of work that need to happen for that to be a successful launch on the 15th of November. Yeah, yesterday. So what were those different child tasks? And some people do this in their head. You know, when I first did project management, it was just in my head. For example, but then I realised there's so many benefits to be realised by doing project management. So what were the different child tasks to make that happen? You might have needed to communicate that, market that. You needed to make sure that the building was finished on time. You maybe needed to coordinate people being there, some support from the internal people within your service. So all the different child tasks, and post-it notes is fine on that. It's a good way of just brainstorming, really.
Thank you. Yeah.
So if you could have a go at that. Oh, there's some comments in the chat, isn't there? Okay, that's fine. Yeah. So if we come back at 20 past, and I'm not going to ask everybody to feedback because we don't have time, but I'd like a good volunteer or two at 20 past to feedback what their parent task was, what their child's tasks are, and any associated work packages with those child tasks. Okay. give you a few more minutes. If anybody does want to talk through their ideas with me, that's fine. I'm available at the moment, and hopefully, if people are watching the video, you're having a go at this activity as well.
Has everybody been doing them in pairs or in groups?
I think some people have been doing it on their own, Lucy. I think some people have paired up. Either way is fine.
Before colleagues come back, just to flag, I was just trying to find it actually, and I can't. We have an event planning grid to deal with those issues, and I think we need to possibly publish some of those tools that we're using internally to help other groups, reinventing the wheel all the time, because there's various things that can help people think through this process. Things you do routinely for every event or a big campaign. We've got some examples in-house. Make a note of that, but I think we could probably share them on the resource page where we're sharing these tools that will help you with it. Do you have any that you can recommend, Michael, as well in terms of open source template?
In terms of, Andrea, just
any open source online templates that other organisations can use to help with their planning, creating.
Yeah, so within this presentation at the end, there's links to useful documents, reading, and one of the things that is on there is a link to a Gantt chart. Yeah, I mean, it doesn't relate specifically to the community and voluntary sector. It's just an open one. It's a spreadsheet that somebody's created, a template, and put on the internet. And I thought it was a really useful one because it breaks it down quite well.
We've got lots of our own versions, but what we could do is strip them out and again, not wait for it to be perfect.
Andrea, can I just say I can hardly hear you. I don't know what anybody else's situation is, but you're very quiet for me.
My laptop's definitely faulty. Apologies, Annie. I was just saying we've got a range of templates and tools that we use in BCVS that we could strip out and share through the course recording page so that other organisations can use and repurpose those rather than starting from scratch.
I'm just going to share, just whilst we're waiting for people to finish, this template. So I'm just going to stop sharing and then start again. So this is the template. I think the idea, as you mentioned earlier, Andrea, around the kind of mandatory, almost checklist type child tasks to be aware of could be pre-populated into this as a CVS type Gantt chart. So I'm just going to, I don't know how big this appears on your screen. So you can see here, you just basically input, you put your own dates in and put all your own information in here, and the names of who's responsible for the tasks. I mean, you don't have to be as complex as this, certainly when you're doing it for the first time. You can obviously delete the rows or columns as appropriate. But yeah, you could make a Bassett Law CVS standardized Gantt out of this. Just need a bit of tweaking. There's a link to there.
Apologies, I was just going to say I can see Smartsheet referenced at the top, and if that's where it's from, it will explain some of the functionality in here because it's an automated software package that you can buy a license to, and it is good. But there's a reason for some of the structure of this version then if it's come from Smartsheet.
Yeah, I can check where it's from actually. So I'm just going to fast forward right to the end because we will. Oh, it's being really slow.
It's an Excel-based piece of software, so you can do it in Excel. It just automates sending messages to people and reminders and things like that. Smartsheet is kind of does on the tin.
We'll come to that at the end. It's not really liking me.
It's not a big put. Sorry, it's just a comment. Ignore.
It's not liking me going through these slides really quickly, so I better go back to where we were, otherwise it might crash. Maybe shared. Okay, so hopefully everybody's back. Would anybody like to share their parent task, the child tasks associated with their parent task, and just some examples of what they think the work packages would be as part of those?
I don't mind sharing.
Okay, Rachel.
Oh, I'll do it on the screen. Marjana came upstairs and we did it together. So I'll just find it because I typed it on. Sorry, I'm just trying to find it. I've got that many white windows open. Can everyone see that?
Yeah.
So we chose the BCVS 50th birthday event, which we're doing at some point next year, but it is very early stages at the moment. We just know it's happening. So the objective would be to raise awareness of BCVS, everything we've achieved over 50 years and what our plans are for the next however many. So that'd be the parent task, and then child task would be deciding on a venue, like where we're going to have it, when we're going to have it, and how much it's going to cost. And then obviously deciding, booking, arranging, and then obviously the different people that would be involved in those sorts of things like health and safety and sort of, you know, local knowledge, anybody that needs to be involved in those. And then attendees, so who is it aimed at, who do we want to invite and how we're going to invite them. The marketing and comms plan would come within that, so press releases and designing the flyers and the invites and where we're going to send them, how we're going to send them, how much money have we got for that. Then some follow-ups, so don't just invite them and then forget about them if they haven't replied, invite them again, sort of thing. And then an evaluation at the end, asking them what they thought about it. And then agenda, what we're going to do on the day, what's actually going to happen, who's going to do what, guest speakers, decide who we're having and invite them if we're going to have guest speakers, are we going to do any activities, are we going to do any workshops, basically the plan of the actual day, and again sort of involving health and safety and things like that within that. So that's as far as we got.
I think it's brilliant within sort of 7 or 8 minutes. That's fantastic. Was it Rachel and Marjana pulled that together?
Marjana, yeah.
Yeah. Brilliant. Thank you very much. Stephanie, have you got a comment about this one, or is it something about your own?
It was my own, but no,
Okay.
it is very good. Well done, you two. So yeah, I thought I'd use a real life one as well, like Rachel. And I'm looking at incorporating food hubs with the slow cooking courses. So the parent task would obviously be incorporating the slow cooker courses into the food hubs, and child tasks would be governance, so regular steering group meetings with all the organisations that participate in that, partner meetings. Another child task would be course structure, so how the course, like course handbook, dates of courses. Another child one would be finance, so regular reviewing of the cash flow, funding breakdown, quarterly reports for that as well by project leads. Another child task would be marketing and branding, so who would overlook the flyers, advertising, correct branding for the project, and that had to be agreed together. And then delivering and reporting and evaluating, so sponsors, project manager to establish the requirements, quarterly reporting to sponsor, and case studies as well.
Brilliant. That's excellent. I'm really pleased with the two that I've seen so far. Brilliant. Julie.
Hi, sorry, I've had my camera off, it kept glitching a little while ago. I'm sat with Monica, so we've just gone, to be fair, not quite as fancy as Rachel's, we've just scribbled it on a piece of paper. So we've looked at, again, a kind of a live example. So it's the Learning on Prescription project that's sort of just kind of kicked off, but we need to obviously work on some more kind of project planning as well. So that's about expanding the pathways of support that's offered to patients of the social prescribing link workers and the general public, and encouraging them through these new pathways into different types of community learning. So either like a workshop session. So that's the overall project parent task, and that project, BCVS is the project manager, and we're working in partnership with several other voluntary sector organisations. So myself and Monica, we're probably more familiar with the structure that Andrea mentioned earlier. So we went from the top, governance, strategy and business development. So that would be child task 1, and then underneath that the tasks would be setting up a project team or a steering group, obviously sharing the original project plan, the PID, with the team, and agreeing project manager. And then child task 2 would be looking at kind of policies and any HR that needed to be considered. So then the subsets of that would be making sure that the courses are available to all residents of Bassetlaw, and that then kind of links into the side, sustainability inclusion, but we didn't get that far down the list. And so one of the other subsets would be making sure all the third sector organisations have safeguarding policies in place, that they have DBS checks if that would be applicable, and that the organisations who are delivering the sessions have systems in place to provide support for those individuals that might be attending the sessions. And then the third one, we only got to 3. The third child task then would be around finance and risk, so developing a risk register and identifying a project lead for finance, and that's as far as we got in the time.
In 8 minutes, that's brilliant. And
Yeah.
risk register, thank you so much for mentioning risk register, because that is something we're going to cover and is also really important, along with schedule managing. That's probably for me kind of one of the next most important aspects of this. Brilliant. I think we'll go to Annie and then afterwards Kirsty. So
Hi. And me and Becky phoned each other because we're both working from home, and we looked at putting on a volunteer event, a volunteer celebration event, you know, something like that. And sorry, I've got a dog in the background who's squeaking a toy. Sorry.
We can't hear.
we looked at, obviously the event itself is the parent task, and then we only managed to do 2 child tasks in the time because we were deciding what was a task and what was a subtask, and so we thought attendance was one task, and then under that was the marketing of it, you know, how we're going to invite people, how we're going to, you know, direct contact, and then how we're going to market the events as well to make it popular. And then we put the venue as another subtask, child task, sorry. And then under that there was things like food, decorations, DJ, lighting, gifts, and then all the risk assessments around doing things in the venues. And then there was like the raffle, and we didn't know whether, you know, if you wanted to run a raffle, that could be a child task in itself to, you know, get people to donate to a raffle, but it could also just sit under the venue. We were a bit confused about what we would put where, so we were having a bit of a discussion around that.
It was very similar really to the one that Rachel presented. You know, when kind of Rachel brought hers up, I thought, yeah, we, you know, the sort of venue and attendees were the same, which was really good. You know, clearly there's a structure to it. One of the things, you know, was actually trying to keep it, I suppose, to those 3 child tasks, because you don't want to suddenly create this huge, enormous, multiple 6 child tasks with loads of threads coming down from it. So it is quite useful. I found it useful just trying to bring things into the same and make sure that you work into smaller numbers of child tasks, not making it massive.
Yeah, thank you, brilliant. And finally, Kirsty.
Hi, mine's probably a bit more basic than some of them, but mine's looking at, with the Tackling Loneliness Collaborative, we're talking about possibly having a youth-focused loneliness conference, because a lot of our work's been digital, so I wanted to do something face-to-face. So the parent task would be the actual conference event, and then the child task would be sort of the content of the conference, and the focus of it, the audience of who is it for, who's included, the marketing, and then things such as the room hire, location, food risk assessments and all those kind of things. So again, it's that thing of working at the top and working what are you actually doing it for, you know, who are your panelists going to be, what's the content going to be, and then sort of working from there, I think, really.
Yeah,
So,
some of the examples. That's great. I mean, some of the examples are quite similar, and that's fine. I think it goes to show Andrea's suggestion around maybe having one that's kind of preset for organising events might be really useful, because the things that everyone's mentioned about really quite similar. So it'd save a lot of time. But you've all done that in 8 minutes. So, you know, this isn't an 8-minute job. This is an hour. This is at least, you know, 2 hours work, and refining it and running it through the project board and coming back and amending it. And then, of course, changing this work breakdown structure, which the task was, into then a Gantt chart where you then start to put dates on these things as well and provide it task owners, so you know who's responsible. You can't, as a project manager, be responsible for all of this, but you need to know it's happening. Andrea?
Yeah, I was going to say, I suppose sometimes in very small organisations you might be responsible for this, but and it does require an hour or so of investment in planning time. But even for those organisations where there's only one paid worker and therefore they're only accountable to themselves and their board, it's still a useful process, because one, if you get hit by a bus tomorrow, who's going to pick it up and know who's done what from your board? 2, it relies on having a superhuman robot memory to remember everything, and it exposes the organisation to risks around that, things being overlooked, a health and safety assessment, etc., EDI considerations, etc. So I suppose I'm just underlining how useful it is. Even if you're a tiny organisation, it can be really useful and help avoid those issues, risks and scope creep.
Yeah, and it keeps everything in one place as well. I mean, I'm sure we've all done post-its and notebooks and stuck things here and there. The advantage is it keeps everything in one place. That's great. We'll move on then. I'm just going to start sharing again. So that's the task that you've just That's all we're going to do in terms of schedule management today. You could do a lot more if you wanted to, but of course we're trying to fit in quite a lot into the session today. So we're going to move on to risks and issues, which has already been mentioned. So in terms of benefits of risk management, would anybody like to just really quickly say a word or two about the benefits of risk management? Okay, no problem. So here's my sort of brainstorming / research experience in terms of risk management. So why do we do it? It enables better, informed, more believable plans. It shows that you've considered what the risks are to running a project. And when I'm talking about risks here, it's less so about health and safety, it's about risks to the project. Health and safety is separate, which we'll talk about later. It increases the likelihood of a project adhering to its schedules and its budgets because you've considered what could go wrong. Many things can go wrong, and being able to kind of understand what they are from the outset and have a contingency in place, a mitigation plan, is going to be really helpful later down the line when things do go wrong. So we've got the assessment, justification of contingencies. So there's a bit of a check in there as well around, is it financially sound? If not, then why are we doing it? A side benefit is it helps people to develop the ability to assess and to manage risk. And it also facilitates greater risk taking, which isn't necessarily a disadvantage. We need to sometimes take risks. Sometimes in organisations, you get very risk averse organisations. They think it's too risky, so they don't do it. Actually, let's do a risk analysis. It might be worth doing. There might be some benefits that are gained from it that we didn't think about, that they were there in the first place. So, with that in mind, come on, go on to the next slide. So what are project risks? So this is a definition of what a project risk is. And it's the likelihood of an unanticipated event that could affect the project. We're still at the planning stage. We haven't even started yet, but we have come up with a risk assessment, risk analysis. Nothing's gone wrong yet, but it might do. So what happens when something is a risk? We mitigate. And we'll look at a template in a minute whereby we can start to put this into a document, risk mitigation. I'm sure many of you have done risk assessments before, maybe venue risk assessments, event risk assessments, and you always assess the risk and then you think about what the mitigation is to reduce the risk of that happening or the severity if it does happen. So risk mitigation is the ideal response to potential risks that might arise within a project, the ideal response at the time of planning. It might change later on, which is why it's always useful to come back and just check that you've got this right in your risk analysis. Have a look at it every month or even more frequently than that. How do we manage these risks? Through good risk and issue management. So this section is going to be about that. And the work you've done already on your schedule management and the parent task that you're thinking about in terms of your project, also bear that in mind when you're thinking about the risks, risk and issue management. So in terms of project speak, we'll talk about these in a little bit more detail, but there is a risk assessment process. There should be a risk assessment process for any project, risk management process. And the 5 steps are to initiate that risk management process, and you normally initiate that through the risk management plan. I don't know in your service whether you have a risk management plan. You've probably got overarching risk management policies, but you might not have a specific risk management plan, but you'll need to draw one up for the purpose of your project, which will be in proportion to the size of the project that you're doing. It'll be very different to building a new housing estate as to planning a new course, of course. Identification. So you initiate the risk management plan. You are now in the process of identifying through the risk register, which we're going to look at quickly on the next slide, of what those risks are. And in terms of pulling together that, it's not something, it's probably something you won't do on your own, or you won't do quickly. You'll do it over time, you'll speak to people. You need to get expertise for certain aspects. You need to brainstorm, you need to go through checklists, perhaps. And then once you've identified those risks, you need to analyse them. Which I think that's pretty standard practice, analysing what the risk is, and then start to mitigate through risk response plan. How can I mitigate against this? It doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means you need to have a plan in place for if things do go wrong. And at the end of the project, like any project management plan, there'll always be closure, there'll be lessons learned at the end of that, and risk will be one of those things that you can learn from. So, oh sorry, it wasn't the next slide, I must have put another one in after writing that. So in terms of pulling together the risks identification, assumptions and constraints analysis, so these are something that you'll do at the start of the end of the PID, project initiation document, and just as you start to perform the project management plan. What assumptions have we made in this? And they can be the most basic assumptions that you've made in terms of putting this project together. So one of them could be that everybody will still be employed by this service in 3 months' time, for example. That's an assumption that we're making. We're assuming that we'll still have the funding. We're assuming that we'll still be working from the same building, for example. And what are the constraints? What are the things that we can't do as part of this? What are the things that aren't part of this? Brainstorming, checklists. You can get these on internet, risk assessment checklist. Google it, loads of ideas. Similarly, prompt lists, your own internal organisation policies as well, and a SWOT analysis could be useful in identifying what the risks are going to be as part of this project. And you'll also need to think about proactive and reactive approaches to risk management. So mitigation would often be proactive. You thought about it, you put it in place proactively before it's actually happened. And then there will be reactive approaches to risk as well. So for example, if somebody's come along, bumped their head at an event, we need to react to that. So when we talk about proactive and reactive is often seen as that kind of a negative, or dealing with it afterwards. But sometimes we need to plan to be reactive as well. So it's not always a negative thing. So here's an example. And there's an example as well in the slide at the end where I've got the links to the further reading and documents of how you might complete a risk register. The basic information at the top, you kind of expect that to be there, when it was completed, who completed it, which project is it, and within the table itself, you might identify each risk as a number. So the risk could be if you're doing something involving cooking, that somebody's going to come along and burn themselves on the stove. Who is the risk owner for that? You need to identify who's going to own that risk, and there has to be a person. I would suggest one person. Like anything, if you suggest more than one person, it doesn't become clear who the person is. What's the risk name? What's the description? What's the probability? You might have something within CVS that you do yourselves. You've probably got your own version of a risk assessment. You might not have your own version of a risk register. They're very similar. So we've got the probability of something happening on a scale of 1 to 5. This is quite standard practice on a scale of 1 to 5 for probability, and then the impact or severity on a scale of 1 to 5 as well. And you would often multiply those two together. So for example, the probability of somebody burning themselves on a stove might be 2, and then the impact of that might be 3. You multiply those two together and you get a total score of 6. To use another example, maybe an extreme example, if you're doing roof walking, the probability of somebody falling is really quite high, it might be 5. The impact of them falling is 5. So you multiply those two together and you get a total score of 25, which is the highest possible score. So you think, actually, in terms of mitigation, if something's 25, I really need to think really carefully about mitigation. And I actually need to think about whether we're going to do this or not, because it might be too risky. Roof walking, we're not going to do that. if we absolutely have to, we're going to make sure we've got proper bollards in place so that people can't fall, for example, and that would be the mitigation. So this, you would list each risk, and you would score each risk, and you take this to the project board, talk it through with your project sponsor. So, just a quick question and answer. Would anybody like to share with the group a time where good risk management has prevented catastrophic failure or really severe issues, where good risk management has prevented that? On the flip side, do feel free to share any examples where risk management wasn't so good and where there was an issue. Let's go for the more positive. I did some really good risk management and it prevented something terrible from happening.
I'd argue to kick things off, and I think it's really important that colleagues do come up with examples here. Kick things off, we have weekly reviews of COVID risks and have adjusted the mitigation needed according to the scale of the risk at any single. So I think we do that really well in BCVS, and that's arguably, we can never prove it, we can't prove a negative, but it's prevented an outbreak, taking care of the well-being of staff.
Yeah, good example. We all had to readjust in March 2022. We all had to go away and write policies, and hopefully that has prevented deaths. Lucy, I think you were first.
It's hard to think of positives. That's really bad, isn't it? I was just thinking at the office, we had some floods, didn't we, not so long ago, and we had to remove all the carpets. So what we'll try to do is anticipate when it was going to happen again, and just try and prevent the damage. That was just thinking of something that we've done locally. But it's easier to think of negatives, and I did mention on the first one last week that it's quite a really good anecdotal story that I like to tell. But the shortest job I've ever worked on was where the person it's a great idea, a great concept, you know, really charismatic individual, set up a project, but he didn't do any project planning. Luckily for him, he had money to I think you say payroll the organisation, but he never did any planning, no risk management, and in the end we only existed for 2 months, and then we were all made redundant. And in our contracts, when you looked in the small print, it did say that it was all right to do that. So that was the only risk analysis, I suppose, that he did of his project. But that was just my one. But say it's hard to think of positives, which sounds really bad.
No, it's really useful, Lucy, because what you've told the group is, if you don't properly risk manage or properly think through what could go wrong, then things will go wrong. Yeah. Rachel.
Hiya. So we had the volunteer event in Bolsover early on in the year, and when we went to go to the venue and do some filming there for some promo of it, Annie and I looked at the venue and realised that it probably wasn't suitable for the event itself. It was very small. You wouldn't have been able to get in with a wheelchair. You wouldn't have been able to get in with a pushchair. So very last minute, the event wasn't organised by us initially. Neither of us were the project manager for that one. But the person that was obviously hadn't thought about some of these things. So I'm marketing and PR for BCVS, and worst case scenario would have been somebody wanting to come and wanting to volunteer in a wheelchair and couldn't even get in the building. So I was thinking, you know, it's a PR risk as well as a health and safety risk.
Yeah.
So at the very last minute, after that event that we'd been after the filming, we decided it's less of a risk to change the venue last minute and put a sign on the door at the old venue saying, you know, the venue's changed, and try and get the word out as quickly as possible that we've changed venues. And so that's what we did, and we changed venues, and somebody did come on a mobility scooter that if it had been at the other venue wouldn't have been able to get in. So it was a positive solution in the end.
Yeah, good example. I like that you've mentioned a PR one rather than a health and safety one as well, so that's good. Thank you. Jade.
Yeah, mine kind of goes off what Andrew was saying in terms of identifying risk, we'd never really, COVID hit, we'd always done face-to-face therapy and support within our services. So within a week, we had to turn that around and risk manage that and go online. And the positive spin of that is that now our services can reach more people who actually couldn't engage due to personal issues or whatever traumas they were facing in terms of that. And the spin on that is now that actually it's risk assessment that continues as everyday business, and we offer that online therapy and things. So it's kind of the spin around of the positive of that becoming identifying the risks and everyone being really nervous about going online and doing that kind of work, and how, you know, in terms of staff safety, we know that the safety's improved, but the risks that come along with that around sessions and endings and not being physically face to face and mitigating against that. But then now that's kind of common practice, so it's had its positive impact for some as well.
Yeah, great example.
I don't know if I got lost there in what I was trying to explain.
I think you also talked about how it became business business as usual, and many organisations questioned why didn't we do this before, you know? So because maybe it was seen as a risk to even think about that, actually. Andrea.
I was just going to give another example that is really common in my experience, and that is the risk of when you support staff to do training and qualifications and upskill, that you may lose them because they progress on to other better paid jobs elsewhere. And that's often used by organisations as a justification for not investing in staff development. So it is a risk, and we take that with awareness in BCVS, but we do invest in staff development. So, and the positive outcome of that risk is we have you know, better qualified, more knowledgeable staff, and hopefully more invested in our organisation too. But it is a risk, and we know that.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you. Right. So we're going to move on, probably another 5 or 10 minutes, and then we'll have a comfort break. So just to finish off on the risks and how they impact could turn into issues as well. So for your project, what are the risks? We probably don't really have time to think about your work breakdown structure at the moment, but once you've finished the session today, this is just some of the things you could think about. So staffing, which leads on from what Andrea was just talking about, but also staffing in terms of, do we have the expertise within the team to deliver what we need to deliver? Is it in one person's head? And is that one person definitely going to be here in a year's time? That's a risk. And you could mitigate that by making sure that the information in that staff member's head is shared across more than one person, for example, or that they take appropriate notes or have flowcharts, process maps in place to support that risk going wrong. Risks with delivery, maybe getting not enough participants, nobody turning up at the event. Health and safety, which we'll come to a bit later, because health and safety is one of these that can actually impact life and death. The others generally don't. Governance, is there a risk around governance? We spoke a little bit about that earlier. Is everybody fully engaged in governance? The reputation, so PR is Rachel was talking about earlier as well. That's something we have to consider throughout everything that we do as third sector organisations. Scope creep, talked about that earlier, mentioned earlier that has to be in the risk register. Scope creep has to be in there. Finance, budget, funding, money, basically. I won't say much about those, but if the money isn't there, then we can't do the project. So that's going to be a risk. Political landscape, changing weekly at the moment. So that's something we need to consider as well. You might not be affected by that, depending on what the project is, but you might be if it's a bigger, longer term project, perhaps. Changes of government. Time, slippage, prioritisation. Certainly project members and accountability of project members. So if you're relying on somebody from a different team within your service, for example, IT, or if comms and marketing is a different part of a service, what kind of management do you have as a project manager over their prioritisation of tasks? If you need something doing by next Friday, and this was agreed right from the outset, that they've been pulled into something else by their actual manager, who has the say on where that person prioritises? And that is absolutely a risk. It depends who the sponsor is, and the power, if you like, of that person and the steering group. So that's something you need to think about in terms of risks. And if anybody would like to add anything to that, please do feel free. This is mostly from my experience and from what I know about project management, but it's not exhaustive. And again, I can't see hands, so just do feel free to interrupt. So in terms of risks becoming issues, an issue occurs when a problem that is immediate or is about to occur will breach accepted tolerances. You would hope that the risk had already been foreseen, so it was hopefully on the risk register, and you have actions in place should this risk occur, like a venue is on fire, so you need to find another venue, for example. So hopefully it's been foreseen, but there will be unforeseen issues. None of us are perfect, and nobody saw COVID coming, actually. So that was very much unforeseen. That was probably in not many project risk registers. May have been in some, global pandemic, perhaps, but I would anticipate it wasn't in many risk registers. So then it requires immediate and possibly dramatic action. It is probably going to require support from the project sponsor to agree a resolution. So the project manager might have ideas about how they can address it. There may be something in the plan that tells them what they need to do in the event of this issue happening, but they're probably going to need to go to the project sponsor, who take this to the project board or the steering group to think about what do we do now, and have a discussion and meeting about that. And just to flag that issues are different to problems. We all deal with problems all the time, every day, every hour of every day. Sometimes we're dealing with problems. But this is firefighting. These are things we can deal with. Okay, I need to do something a bit differently. I need to do something later, for example. That's different to an issue. An issue is something that has actually affected the delivery of the project and needs escalation. We also have, for bigger projects, you're going to have an issues log. So the purpose of the issues log is many, actually. It's not just a case of, oh, something's gone wrong, I need to record it. It's recording it because it means it can be communicated properly across the project sponsor, across the project board, that you can have a think about what actions we can take to mitigate the issue. But also it's going to be really useful for lessons learned as well. At the end of the project, you can look back, issues like, here are the issues that we had last time. We need to think about this list of issues when we're preparing for our next project in terms of our risk register. These issues probably now need to inform the risk register. It's going to be a really useful go-to document for that. So we have an issue management log, and there are different levels of depth that you can go into in terms of issue management. This one here actually goes way past column I. So you can see on the screen at the moment, column A to column I. It actually goes across to column Z or something. It goes on quite a long ways, but you don't necessarily need all of those different columns. So here we've got an ID, giving it a number, status, open, in progress, or closed. What's the priority of this issue? Description, who's the owner, when are we going to resolve this issue by, do we require further escalation, summary impact, and action steps. So I think most of those are probably what you would include on an issue log. They're the fields that I would include if I was to create a template from new. There are other columns you could include as well, but probably go a little bit over the top. So that's an example of one. Every time you come across an issue, fill it in, and it needs to go to the project sponsor and be discussed, looked at as part of the steering group or project board. So, any questions on risks and issues? After break, we're going to go on to quality management. Okay, I know that's a little bit quick, but again, we don't have loads of time. There's so much more reading you can do on this, which will be provided. Andrea, in terms of break, 5-10 minutes?
Yeah, 10 minutes if we kick back off at 10 past.
10 past, brilliant. See you all then. you could just make your way back now, everybody, please. One more minute and we'll make a start on the second part of the session. I'll start talking and then hopefully people will start to come back. So we've got quality, communication, information and reporting, procurement, change control, health and safety. And we've got 48 minutes. So we're not going to go into any of those in deep depth, but we will hopefully try to be really efficient with the time and it'll hopefully be really useful for you. So in terms of quality management is something that we need to consider. And it's often in project speak used for if you're making products, if you're going to be producing something at the end, whether it's a building or something manufacturing a certain product, you need to think about quality at the end of it, quality assurance, quality management. But it does apply as well to the CVS, because what we need to think about is what does quality mean within this project that we're looking at delivering. And in terms of whether it's Rachel with marketing and comms, or whether it's with Julia with events, planning an event, essentially what we're looking at in terms of quality is we want it to be good. We want, at the end of it, we want it to be good. We looked at the iron triangle where we've got cost, we've got time, we've got quality. So this is looking at the quality side of things. So what do we need to do in terms of the event planning or the comms plan or whatever we're seeking to do, volunteer coordinating? We need to identify what does quality look like. Is there a shared understanding of what quality looks like from the beginning with the project sponsor, with the project board? Do they know what we're seeking to achieve by the end of it? Is it a pass-fail test? Probably isn't. There's going to be varying degrees of quality. How are we going to measure that? So, as I said earlier, it is often used for product-based projects, which we're probably not going to be involved in very often, unless it's a new build education centre, for example. It can be used in other environments such as customer or user experience, certainly with websites. There's a new thing, UI, UX, user experience and interface as well. So it's looking at what does good look like and how is that going to be managed and measured at the end of it. So if it's an event, it might be a survey, for example. We're going to measure it at the end. We're going to get some feedback, some evaluation at the end of this event, so that we can use that to better inform us next time when we do the same thing again. Or there might be ways in which we can manage that as we go along the process as well. So how are we going to manage that? So it's really useful to consider how you're going to do that. So don't forget about quality when you're doing your project management. We all know at the end of it, we want it to be a good event. We don't want to be the person known for planning a terrible event. None of us do, but also it needs to be good for the service as well. So that was really just a little bit on quality management. I don't know if anybody wants to ask any questions about that or add anything from their experience at all. No.
Just a flag for for the BCVS colleagues, Julie is our quality lead in BCVS. So if you want to get more detail on our approach in BCVS, come and speak with Julie, and we'll be picking this up in terms of how that's embedded in every project going forward.
But quality in terms of managing projects, or from an education perspective?
Well, quality for the whole organisation. So the quality standards that we work to, and how what we do sits under each quality standard that we work to. So they inform the delivery of each project as well. So we're an ISO 9001 accredited organisation, for example, and we have to work to various other quality standards as well.
Okay, thank you. Lucy?
It was just a comment. I forget if it is that standard, but I know in the past the comment has been that when people go for these quality standards, it's like you say, it's defining what do you mean by quality. So you're getting something to the same level, but it doesn't mean it's necessarily good. It's just that you're maintaining that presence. So it is a bit subjective about what you mean about quality. That was my comment.
It is subjective, and that's why from the outset we need to know, the project board needs to know what quality looks like, what success is, because if we don't, then we don't know if we've been successful or not, or if the quality's been good or not. So it's really difficult to kind of give an example. I mean, would you expect 90% of people to go away from the event feeling as though it was a good experience for them? It's just something to consider when you're doing the project management plan. But we do, I do need to move on from that. We're going to talk about communication planning, because this is really, really important, communication planning. And as we can see there, the quote on the left hand side, 90% of project management is communication. Is that true or false? It's not actually, it's a rhetorical question, really. I'm not asking you to answer that. Some people, I've heard it a few times, and some people say it is, because if you're not actually doing the planning, what are you doing? You're probably doing emails, or you're on the phone, or you're in a team meeting, for example. So communication it probably is around 90% of all project planning, and it's the one area where, it's one of the areas where if it goes wrong, the whole project will go wrong. If we haven't told somebody that they need to open up the building on the 15th of November because we've got the event planned and nobody's there to open it, everything else, all the work that's gone in, has just been lost because the event can't happen, because we can't get into the building. For example, it's a very basic example, but just to use this diagram here, I find this diagram really useful in terms of thinking about what needs to be on the communication plan, because like the risk register, like the issues log, like the scheduling, this is another document. So the project management plan that we talk about is actually a combination of multiple documents all pulled together to create the project management plan based on the project initiation document, which we talked about last week. So what we need to think about in terms of communication are those 5 key areas. When are we going to communicate? So when, in terms of how often we're going to do that. Is it going to be monthly or weekly? Is it going to be a report? Are there milestones along the way in terms of the Gantt chart that was written at the beginning, the scheduled in monthly meetings, for example? What are we going to communicate probably around the strategy and how we're going to get to the end? So we're going to communicate the progress, perhaps, the initiation plan that we've already talked about, and kicking off the project. Who are we going to communicate with? And this for me is one of the most important ones, because it's really easy to forget people that we haven't communicated with as part of the project. So who are we going to communicate with? And it's just, again, a bit like the issues log, risk register. It's about just brainstorming, talking to people, thinking, going away from the desk, coming back the next day, in the car. Oh yeah, we all have these light bulb moments all the time. Oh, I need to do that. And then we forget. So this is why it's useful to have the communication plan. Like Andrea said earlier, nobody's got superhuman memory, so we just need to put it on there, revisit it periodically, every week, every 2 weeks, every month, revisit that communication plan. Oh yeah, I've not spoken to that person about this, or I need an update from IT about how this hardware is going in, and progress of whether it's been ordered or not. So that's really important that we consider who, and it says at the top there, all stakeholders. And the purpose So there has to be a reason for communicating. We're not doing it just for fun of it. We need to think about what is the purpose. Why am I communicating with this specific person? So again, the IT example. And then the type. So this is another important one, and something I've thought about quite a lot recently, just within my own work, around the method of communication. Because I don't know about everybody else, but I think I receive far too many emails, many of which I'm CC'd into, and think, why am I CC'd into that? And another 10 people have been CC'd into it, and they've all had to now read this email that's taken them all 2 minutes to read. So that's 2 minutes, 20 minutes of time lost on the organisation because somebody CC'd the wrong people in. So method of communication, does it need to be an email? Reading the email, spending time replying to the email, then that other person reading it and replying. Can we not just have a phone call? Would that not be a lot quicker? So thinking about the method as well. And some of it needs to be planned, some of it's unplanned. So phone call you can do anytime, email you can do anytime. Meetings obviously need to be structured, thought through, proper agendas. Nothing worse than going to a meeting without an agenda. Everyone's sitting there, what we had to talk about again? No notes being taken. So if you're doing meetings, it's really important that they're done properly. I'm not talking about my organisation, I hasten to add, at all. Yeah, we know that meetings are an issue across the board, really. So any presentations or discussions that need doing. Lucy, I have come back to the screen. I've seen your hands up. You're on mute though.
Yes, you wouldn't hear. And it just suddenly jumped into my head about communication. My husband is a blacksmith, and this is just relevant to anybody that's ever had building works. And I just suddenly thought it's something that crops up so much is that architects, when we had our extension done on our house, it's just dreadful communication. But time again, my husband tells me this is architects will do these amazing drawings, but then the builders will come along and they can't actually implement them because they're not practical. It seems to happen every time. I just thought that's an amazing example of where communication is so important, because they're very important, functions. One cannot exist without the other one, but the communication is where it always seems to go wrong. Just building an architect's there. That was just another anecdote of mine.
It's a really useful point, Lucy, and it's about curating your communication in a way that the person listening is able to understand it, and that's a good example. But it applies all the time. I don't know if anyone's done teacher training, and Berlow, and there's a theorist, Berlow. He talks about if you've got two people communicating, you've got the message in the middle, but you've got filters in between that. So you've got the person, you've got a filter. You've got the message, you've got the receiver's filter, and then you've got the person. So we've all read emails where we think, oh, I don't like that tone. But actually the tone wasn't there in the first place. That maybe put an exclamation mark at the end and it made it appear as though there was a tone. So thinking about your message and how that's put across is something I think in this 21st century that we're not always aware of. Andrea.
I was just going to flag that this is a risk in itself, both not doing it, of course, but doing it and not being mindful of the scope and resources and time and other controls attached to a project, because you can create an amazing comms plan. We could do it now that would be fit for purpose, but if it's not mindful of the scope, the time, the budget available, it's totally unrealistic. So I suppose I'm just flagging there's a risk in itself there, that it's easy for non-comms specialists to get carried away about the ideas that could be good communication, but we need to keep grounding it back in that original scope of what the size of the project and the resource available.
Thank you, Andrea. Yeah, Kirsty, you do emails because you're not going to get caught in a conversation. Yeah, okay, that's a good point, actually. So just moving on to the next communication slide, and to communication planning and a comms plan. There's an example there on the right hand side. I think there's a link to this as well in the further resources at the end. So it can be really useful, used properly, as Andrea says. You need to consider efficiency and effectiveness of the message, which is why I talked about email as opposed to picking up the phone, for example. Being in the office as opposed to working from home. can sometimes be a decision as well that can be quite useful. Yesterday, I needed to do a lot of independent work, so I came home. I knew that if I stayed in the office, people would come in, and I just wouldn't be able to get done what I needed to do. What types of communication methods do you rely on the most, and why? So this is just something for you to consider. We don't have time to go around the group and talk much about that at the moment, but do consider that. But also consider the person you're communicating with, the listener. What communication method do they prefer? What's most useful for them? I know if I contact a certain department, this is being recorded and going nationally, a certain department within my service by email, I'm not going to get a reply. It's a waste of time. So I pick up the phone instead. I use Skype, for example. I know then I'm going to get a reply, and I need it pretty quickly as well. So thinking about that. So on the right-hand side there, it's just a basic comms plan. I hope it's visible on your screen. I've got quite a small screen and it's just about visible. So this is quite a creative one. It's a bit more exciting. Well, it's better than a spreadsheet. We've got the communication goal, communication tool, who's the audience, and how frequently you're going to communicate with them. So it's just really quite a basic one, that is. But you can create your own in Excel if you wanted to, similar headings, and just come back to it every now and again, maybe update it, and it'll just be a really useful aid memoir in terms of contacting, oh, I'm not told comms about this, or I need an update on whether or not these have been printed, has it? So it's just pick up the phone and see what's going on. But you'll also have your more formal meetings in there as well, your project reviews, your steering group meetings, they'll be in there as well. What's the purpose of them? Is there in terms of reference within that group to make sure everybody stays on track? So that's, again, just a whistle-stop tour of communication planning. Don't forget it, essentially, is the message on there. Andrew, is yours still hand stood up from before? Or?
No, it was a new one, and I'm just flagging again for small organisations participating. You may not have a comms specialist or lead, and even if you do, this is the role of the project manager. So you don't need to be a specialist to plan this in at the start of the project. It's about, as you say, Michael, just think through what you're doing, plan it properly.
Yeah, that's great. Thanks. It's really useful, Andrea, for you to come in every now and again, because I'm just focused on the slides. So anything you can add is really useful. Information and reporting then is something that you will absolutely need to consider as part of your project manager role. And the first bullet point there sets out why. Good information management will lead to efficient reporting. So you're not capturing information just for the sake of capturing it. You're capturing it because it will help with that reporting. The project sponsor, the steering group, want to know what's going on. And you won't, if it's a monthly project steering group meeting that you need to attend, it means you're not having to spend hours and hours and hours really worrying and threatening about what's going to be going on. You've got it there. It's okay. I'll just put it into a report. Won't take me long. So right from the outset of the project, think about what's going to be collected. There's nothing worse than getting 3 months in, 6 months in, and somebody asking you for some information that you didn't collect. Oh, damn, I should have collected that. Now I've got to go back and ask all these participants, for example, or get an update from all these different groups involved. So really start to collect it right from the outset. And of course, it depends on the project that you're running. So some will be very information light and some will be information heavy. But do think about what's going to be reported. So you probably need to provide some sort of performance update. Where are we at so far in terms of the schedule? Are we on schedule or not? Do we need to ask for another couple of weeks? Do we need to allocate resources from another part of the organisation to help bring us back on track? What's the cost looking like? Are we going to over budget, under budget? Can we move some money around somewhere and do a transfer in between different cost codes, for example, if that's something you're used to using? How's the quality looking? So it was actually going to be this good, but now it's going to be this good, or it might be even better, for example. Risk exposure. So referring back to that risk register, are we exposed on any of those? Are there new risks that we didn't consider before that need to add into that risk register and reporting through to the steering groups? Exception thresholds as well. So is there anything to comment on in terms of the thresholds that were negotiated at the beginning of the project? And just on the right hand side there, this is borrowed from the APM body of knowledge, which is what I used to get the qualification that I've used to help me prepare these resources. Different stages of information and reporting, and mostly around where we keep that as well. So yes, we're collecting it, but how and where is it going in terms of storage? Thinking about GDPR, of course. Are we collecting information in line with GDPR? Are we collecting more than what we need? If we are collecting more than what we need, why we're collecting it? We're probably breaching GDPR if we're collecting more than what we really need to run the project. GDPR again, in terms of storage, I'm sure at BCVS and anybody else who's watching this at the moment has internal network drive that they store all their information on, and you need a username and password to log into your laptop in order to access that, which would make it secure. But what about portable media, USB storage? Is that something we still use? If so, is it password protected? Is it hard copies? Is it stored in a filing cabinet? Is there a key to that filing cabinet? Who are the key owners to that filing cabinet? Curation as well. So once you're then getting all that information, you're curating it in a way that's digestible for the people who need to receive it, as mentioned earlier, in terms of reporting, and then dissemination of that. Is it at a steering group meeting? Is it an email to the members of a steering group, for example? Archiving and destruction, which are, I think, self-explanatory. Archiving is probably going to be down to your own organisation procedures on that. Destruction, probably own organisation procedures as well. But if you're being commissioned by somebody else to do the work, they might have rules around how long you're allowed to keep data for. So that's just something to bear in mind. I know that ESF, the European Social Fund, and the Education and Skills Funding Agency, which is my main piece of work, we're only allowed to keep things for a certain amount of times, and they're different for each one, which is obviously a problem. So that's, again, really quick on information and reporting. Use the tools that you have. Excel is brilliant. If you're not sure how to use Excel, if you think you could use it better, get some training. It's really useful investment in time, understanding how to use Excel and the features it has. For me, saves hours and hours and hours. So I'm plugging that a little bit. I'm not on commission, obviously, from Microsoft, but do use spreadsheets. Use them. Next one, we're going to move on to procurement. So procurement, what is it? It's a process by which products and services are acquired from an external provider for the incorporation into the project. So what you need to do in terms of procurement when you're looking at your event or comms or whatever it is you're seeking to do, what is the complexity of the work involved in coming together with that event at the end, pulling that project together? What are all the tasks? So it goes back to the parent task, the child tasks, and those work packages. Are they all going to be delivered by the team? Do we have the capability within the team to do that? If not, then we need to think, how can we possibly deliver this work package? Are we going to recruit a new staff member with this expertise? Are we going to draw a staff member from another part of the organisation? Or are we going to procure it? Are we going to go out to tender to get another organisation to do that for us? Also based on the appetite for risk as well of the organisation that you're working in is something you need to consider. And the approach that you're taking to the life cycle. I think Ian might have talked about the project life cycle last week in terms of procurement and tendering. So with that in mind, when it comes to procurement, there's often going to be a make or buy decision. This is project speak, make or buy decision. But what we actually mean by that is, are we going to do it ourselves, or are we going to buy? Are we going to pay for somebody else to do it for us? So make or buy obviously relates mostly to products, but we can interpret that as doing it ourselves or getting somebody else from an external organisation to do it. Thinking about event planning, for example, is there anywhere we need to go? Probably venues. Maybe if you don't have your own venues, that's something you need to go ahead and find. Do you have single or multiple suppliers? Another example could be design of leaflets. Is that something you do internally, or do you commission somebody to do that for you? Thinking about what are the conditions, what are the forms of contract? Is it going to be a contract, or is it going to be a service level agreement? Slightly less formal, but still is a contractual document. of which you can refer back to, and you need to make sure the service level agreement's right from the outset. You might need to get that signed off by project sponsor. You will, it's not something I would ever just write myself without running past somebody else in the service first. I would ask them, because you've put in a signature on there in the end to say that you're going to do something. What's the method of supplier reimbursement? So are they going to be upfront costs? Is all the money going to be paid at the end? Will there be stages within that you're going to release certain amounts of payment, so 25% after a certain amount of work's done, and then the rest upon completion? This is all things that you can put into your service level agreement or your contract. I don't know how much involvement you're going to have with procurement, so I'm not going to talk a lot about procurement, just go over some of the key principles of it, really. Contractual relationships, and where relevant, there might be a supplier selection process. That often depends on the size of the amount of money essentially that you're paying to do something will impact that supplier selection process and your organisation's approach to procurement as well, which obviously I can't really go into. I'm from the local authority, so the supplier selection process is very much around following Notts County Council's processes on that. Even though I work for Inspire, we're commissioned by Notts County Council to do our work. So if you are going out to supplier selection, if you made the decision make or buy, we're going to buy, you need to think about how we're going to do that. Just a really basic one that I'm aware of is you often have to get 3 quotes, for example. You can't just, I can't just go to a friend down the road to say, oh yeah, I want you to do some work for us. Here's a contract. That's obviously something that we can't do and definitely shouldn't do. But in terms of that, again, it comes down to the size of the work that you're seeking to procure. The left-hand side there is as a basic approach to procurement. So to start with, you're going to research what it is and who can provide those that piece of work for you. Which organisations are there that can do that? Is there going to be a pre-qualification? So you may have seen this, I don't know, in terms of if you've been bidding for something yourselves, you might have had to do a pre-qualification questionnaire before you're then able to actually bid for the tender. So if you're procuring, you're now on the other side of this, you're going to ask other people to do a pre-qualification questionnaire. I'm going to go over this quickly because I'm not sure how much it would apply to yourselves. Then you would go out to tender. So the tender is a bidding process. People write their bids, they answer predefined questions that you've set, and you will grade them on the responses that you would like to grade them on. And the highest score will generally win the award. So then you award the contract, you manage the contract, and you close the contract. You need to be aware of, and this isn't my expertise, it's not something I've really been involved in. I've done a bit of grading and scoring, but I haven't actually gone out to tender myself, so I can't tell you about the inside and outside of thresholds. But there are thresholds around which you need to follow procurement policy. So for example, if you're going to go out to tender for something that's worth a few £100,000, there are steps you have to take to make sure it's open, it's fair, there's no discrimination in terms of what you're seeking to buy. And there are thresholds. You can go on, there's a link there. I don't know if this link will work. Oh, it does. And this is provided by, I think, I don't know how to pronounce that, Geldards, maybe. And this talks about changes to public procurement thresholds, and they talk about what those are. So this is UK government, January 2022, and there are thresholds here around which you need to follow procurement rules. So there are different types. I'm not going to go into this. 2 reasons. 1, we don't have time. 2, it's not my area of expertise. And I suppose I'll add a third to that as well, is that these things change and you really need to take advice. So in BCVS, you're probably going to go through Andrea, who hopefully will be able to take advice. I don't know who from. I'm sure within your governance structure, there's somebody who could provide support. For other organisations, yeah, again, you need to take advice. Andrea, is there anything to add on that?
I think you're right, Michael. At this kind of introductory level course, that's enough detail. But I was just going to say that for those who think it's not relevant watching later, answers to this question, if you're bidding for money, alongside answers to how you manage risk, alongside how you do project management, will all help you to score better in getting funding. So even though it might seem a bit abstract, it actually, to understand your own organisational way of dealing with this, which should be specified in your own financial regulations or financial policy, and for BCVS it's Monica as head of finance who leads this area. Yes, I'm ultimately everything, as is our board, but Monica's our lead. So the point is, it adds value to your ability to bid for money and funding if you've got a good understanding of this and can answer those questions properly. That's the only point I was going to make.
Thanks, Andrea. I've just seen the chat, Kirsty. I think you're probably talking about information management rather than procurement with your question. Could you apply some of these to projects at home? Do you want to say any more about that?
It was just the whole process, really, because I was just thinking things at home are things that are more visual for me. So it might be, you know, you might have a bathroom project or something like that. Or obviously with Christmas coming up, you know, that's kind of quite a big entity. So I was just sort of thinking, you know, some of the things that we're talking about could be taken out of this and used in a home sort of setting. So it was just me sort of thinking out loud, really.
Yeah, you can. I remember when I was first introduced to project management, I kind of said, well, what do you mean by project? And somebody said, well, making a Sunday roast is a project. I'm like, okay. And when you think about that, you need to think about what's going to take the longest to cook, probably, because in terms of coming back to that critical path, I think it's a good example of what we mean by critical path. If you've got, I don't know, a piece of beef that's going to take 3 hours to cook, you know that the critical path is kind of restricted by that, because that's the longest thing. So you have to do that first. And then if you've got multiple people coming, you've got multiple, we've all done probably the Sunday roast and thought, oh my God, there's so much going on. You don't write this down, I don't think. Well, I don't anyway, but it's going on in the head all the time. So yeah, you can, Kirsty.
Yeah.
Rachel.
Sorry, just similar when Kirsty's saying, could we apply some of this to what we're learning today at home? I think it works the other way around as well, as in implying what we're like, similar to what you just said, is using some of the stuff we do at home and projects that we do at home the other way around as well. It's like planning a holiday, that's a project. Planning a children's birthday party and sorting out food and party bags in a venue, that's similar to planning an event. So I think it works both ways as well, that we can learn stuff at both sides.
Yeah, thank you. So moving on to change. So change control, change logs, change control. So we very, very rarely, if ever, start a project and it all goes 100% to plan. There are no changes. It's exactly what we wanted and we got it on the day that we wanted it. Perfect. No, that's not going to happen. There might be some small changes. There could be some quite big changes as well. So in terms of event planning, you might think, oh, actually, we're going to change the timetable 3 weeks before because we're going to do some different activities. So that's quite a big change. They're usually going to affect multiple stakeholders and members of the project team. It might even affect bringing in new members of the project team at a certain time as well. So a lot of things to consider with change. They do need to be carefully considered. They might involve some sort of consultation with the project sponsor. So we were going to do this, but actually I've had a thought and it'd be really useful if we could do this as well. Or we're changing the scope. So it's similar to changing scope in many ways, that you need to consider what the impact of that change is in terms of the 3 parts of the iron triangle, coming back to the cost, the time and the quality. Is it going to affect any of those 3? And how can we make sure, if it is, it's in the best possible way? So you might have projects, you might have examples from your own projects where changes weren't communicated effectively and there may have been an impact on this. So the key thing around change control is coming back to communication. An example would be, again, on a new build property. If you've decided that the front door is going to be wider because you want to make it a DDA Equality Act compliant, we're going to change the width of the door to 1 metre instead of 900 millimetres, but you've not told the person who comes and fits the door, that's going to be be a big issue just from a very simple change. So it's important that those things are communicated. And there is often in project management a change log. So you would have, have I got an example of this? Yeah, next. So there's going to be a change log. We'll come on to that in a second. Yeah, so that final bullet point there. Has anybody got any examples of where, because we do have a little bit of time actually looking at where we're at, any examples of where a change was made, but it wasn't necessarily communicated properly and it just went wrong? So it's a change problem, but it's also a communication problem.
Can I ask, when would this be picked up? Would this be picked up during feedback or evaluation of a project? Because you might look back and go, actually, I could see where that had changed, because it sounds as though you're talking about things happening at the time, but I'm not sure that things would necessarily picked up unless it was retrospective.
Yeah, so it's normally things happening at the time, so the change log would be completed as it happens. In terms of reflection on something that's already happened and the project's come to an end, you'd be looking at a lessons learned. So normally with a project, at the end of it, you complete a lessons learned, and that would then help, a bit like the issues log, help in future project planning. So we're talking mostly about if things are changed within the project happening. So it could be a change of venue, it could be a change of date, it could be a change of activity, it could be a change of catering provider, and anything like that. That could, if not thought through properly and communicated properly, could mean things go wrong. So you changed the menu or something, for example. So maybe there was a vegan option before, but now there isn't, and somebody else is doing the job of collecting whether people are vegan or not. And if that communication is not being had, the person who's vegan is going to turn up without what they wanted and not be able to eat anything. Yeah, I think that's probably, off the top of my head, the best example I can give. Andrew, I think you were first.
Yeah, I wasn't going to answer that question actually.
Okay.
Sorry, I'll have to think about a good example of change. But you're right, yeah, it happens all the time. The point I was going to make was that linking back to the definition of quality actually. And Kirsty, you're right, often if project management methodology isn't used and systems followed, people don't pick up things have changed until the end. But that's the reason we should use a methodology and standard review points or stage reviews to make sure any changes to time, quality, or the other one, cost, of course, are picked up early enough so you can act on it. And that's a really common change that affects project delivery is the resource and how you manage that resource. I don't know if you're coming on to exceptions, Michael, but managing by exceptions and agreeing what the tolerance is for a change is part of your project setup, and that just means that the degree of change that you are agreeing to accept without escalating it up to governance and your sponsor for a formal decision. So we might say, for example, this project is going to benefit 10 people, but if it benefits 8, okay, we accept that kind of tolerance.
It's probably implicit in the next slide around the change request. Probably, but it's a really good point. Stephanie's just made a point around POV project, and I think what you're saying is things are changing all the time, constantly.
Yeah, it's lots of change taking place through the POV project, so I can relate quite a lot to this. I think the project leads would as well. That we must, whilst there is a plan in place for example, the filming and recording of the POV project has changed due to the ideas that have come from the young people. So yeah.
But
okay.
That's not, and I can't remember in this case, Jeff, but for example, if that is a project output that we're going to produce the film, the production of the film won't change. That's the bit where there's no tolerance. The methods or who's involved or the timeline might change, and you might agree that change without escalating it. But to decide, no, we're not going to produce a film, that's a level of change that needs control and governance involvement. I don't know if that's correct in this case. I'm just trying to give an example. But just going back to the quality definition again, for our perspective, unless we say otherwise, quality means everything that isn't cost. So change is all part of that quality, ensuring quality happens or the change is agreed if it's going to happen.
Yeah, so it's the tolerances, isn't it? I think that's a really key point. The tolerances that were set out at the beginning, if they're not changing, then it probably isn't something that you need to report. As project manager, you still have that gift of decisions that you can make within what you're attempting to do, as long as it's not changing the deliverables as such.
And it's hard, as we were saying, with abstract concepts sometimes, but thinking about money is a really good example. We have 0 tolerance on projects as our default in terms of budget. We cannot overspend on the budget. So by exception, we may agree to fund a bit of additional activity by a rare exception through another source. But on a project, the control is 0. We will not spend more or less, except by exception. So that's a good example of change control that Monica manages really well.
Rachel?
Yeah, it's just an example of when change hasn't been communicated that well. So when I worked for a leisure company, we did a Healthy at Home campaign throughout COVID, where we put all the gym classes online for people to do at home. And sometimes it happened a couple of times where the gym instructor was either sick or on holiday, and they've told their line manager, which would be the fitness manager, that they're off on holiday, and he knows that they're off. But no one's told me, who's communicating the classes. So you get 10 people turn up to an online class and there's nobody in the studios, nobody there. So, you know, it's all about, it's similar to what you said earlier about who are people accountable when they've sort of got 2 managers temporarily, and, you know, making sure everybody knows everything that's happening so that doesn't happen.
Yeah. And that's, so was that as part of the project, or was that as part of business as usual?
No, it was part of the project because it was just a temporary thing that we did during COVID. So we, you know, it was a Healthy at Home project during COVID.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. So yeah, I said I was going to show you the change management log. Again, this is just an example of what you might have on there. So again, you've got ID to start with, giving it a number. Status again, is it open, in progress, closed? What's the change request description? So just describing what the change is there. Request for product functionality increase we have here. So this is about product one. Who's the owner of that change? When is it expected to be resolved? Does it need escalation? So Andrew's point around whether or not it needs to go to the project sponsor, steering group, or not. It might not. It might be there's something that the project manager can resolve in terms of the day-to-day problems. Then there's an argument over it, whether it should be on there or not. Probably is useful to record it in terms of evaluation and lessons learned. And then the actions that are required. You might also have something really specific about communication. So who needs to be informed of this might be a good prompt so that people aren't forgotten who should be included in there. So that's change control. And finally, we're going to move on to health and safety. So I'm sure you've all done health and safety training as part of your induction. Andrew, is your hand up from before, or is it gone up?
Sorry, I was going to extend the example I gave around finance because my brain's on a lag.
All right.
Of examples where change control goes wrong, and from a common sense perspective to a project management perspective, some people I know of in the past have thought, okay, if I underspend, that's a good thing. We're not spending the whole project budget, that's a good thing. They're not really keeping close controls on that. Then you get to the end of the project and the funder claws back that money. So it's actually a bad thing because you could have reused or used that money in a better or different way if it had been identified earlier. And that's really common in our sector. So I suppose it's a more practical example of change control.
Yeah. Yeah. Don't claw back. Want to spend it. So yeah, health and safety. So this is often going to be governed by the health and safety policy of the organisation. Just some bullet points here around what to be aware of. Certainly, if you're doing bids, you're probably going to need to provide evidence of insurance, and also if you're tendering as well, you're probably going to want to see that. Risk assessment of work packages specifically. They might be within your work packages that you looked at earlier under those child tasks. We need to think about risk assessment for not all of those, but where health and safety could be an issue. So in terms of the event itself, risk assessment arguably might be a child task in itself. Certainly in terms of a venue, you're going to have their risk assessment and staff training. Who's going to carry that out? Have you been trained in risk assessment, or is it going to require a specialist in that sense? And that's again down to your organisation policy. In our organisation, venue risk assessments can be carried out by people who have been trained in risk assessment and signed off by a health and safety team within the service. So that's an organisational thing. Personal protective equipment. Do you need to buy any for whatever reason within the life of your project, whether it's the event itself or things leading up to the event? More often now, if we're putting in bids, we need to consider environmental impacts as well, which is absolutely the right thing to be doing. And we also look at sustainability plans as well. I don't know if anybody's been involved in sustainability plans as part of projects you're involved in. It tends to be a standard expectation across ESF projects now. You'd write a sustainability plan and you would update it periodically. I think it's every 6 months that they ask to see an update of that, and it's an opportunity to consider the environmental and sustainability impact, which kind of comes under health and safety. But also, just to add to that as well, we also usually have an equality, diversity, inclusion plan as well as part of that. Doesn't fit specifically within health and safety, but I think it's something to be aware of in your project planning. And that might be one of the things, I can't remember, Andrea, if that's something you mentioned earlier in terms of when you're doing project planning. Equality, diversity, and inclusion, and considerations around that. So not necessarily health and safety, but I think useful to add in there to think about that. And procured expertise, as I mentioned earlier, where appropriate. So if you're doing some heavy machinery stuff, for example, you're probably going to want to get some procured expertise or speak to somebody about that who can help you understand the risks associated with unfamiliar technology like that. And of course, everything is covered by the Health and Safety at Work Act. I think it was 1974, something like that. But anyway, if you Google Health and Safety at Work Act, there's so much information on there. I think I've provided a link to it as well in the links to further reading, which we'll get to very shortly. So the final slide is around assessing health and safety risk. This one here is a risk assessment template provided by the HSE, Health and Safety Executive, which is sort of a go-to place to know all things health and safety. So they've provided this as an example. It isn't mandatory. What is mandatory is to have a risk assessment in place. What isn't is the template by which you carry out that risk assessment. But essentially, you're going to have very similar categories on there. So you need to think about what are the hazards associated with this. And again, this isn't something that'll take you 5 minutes. If it's taking you 5 minutes, you haven't done it properly. You need to spend a lot more time thinking about what the hazards are, who's going to be harmed and how they're going to be harmed by those hazards, what's already in place to control those risks. So for example, if you're doing some cookery at one of the events that you planned, you've probably got fire blanket or fire extinguisher there as next to the oven, just as a standard thing that's already in place. What further action do you need to take control of the risk? So it needs to be constantly supervised. Children need to be kept away. There might be an area by which people can't enter, from the public. Things like that. So you're really thinking about what different actions you need to take to control the risk, to either prevent it from happening altogether or lessen the impact if it does happen. And then you're going to have who's responsible for carrying out those actions, and when is the action needed by, and is it done or not. So that's a HSE example, but you will have your own within your service, I'm pretty sure, template wise, and you might have something similar to what we had earlier, where we had the scale of 1 to 5 in terms of likelihood, 1 to 5 in terms of impact, multiply them together. Some organisations get high, medium and low, and then there's a table you can look at to define the actual risk rating of that. So don't have a lot of time to go into that, but as I say, I'm sure you've got your policies in place. Summary, recap and questions, come back to that in a sec. I just want to flick to this final slide of the links to further reading and resources. So I've tried to put in there, they're all web links, some hopefully useful documents, templates, information for you. Project management planning, so template, free download project management docs. So I don't think it is the Smartsheets one, that one. I think it's a different one, although it does seem to link to Smartsheets. Gantt chart, Excel template, there's a risk register, issues log, there's a change request example, HSE risk assessment, which I've just showed you, and the iron triangle. It's really quite an interesting read, that is. Communication planning, overcoming communication challenges in project management. So that's a bit of a checklist to think about in terms of communication challenges, and just to go down it and have a quick read of it, and it might just flag something in your mind to help you manage communication issues going forward. Information management, which we talked about a little bit, and that's the APM's website there. And finally, we've got the public procurement policy, which we talked about procurement a little bit. There's a lot more information there. So, summary, recap, and questions. There was a lot to fit in to that. I know we spent a lot on scheduling issues, risks, because they're really important, but that doesn't mean the rest isn't. So, any comments, questions from anybody? All happy? Andrea?
Yeah, I've got, obviously there's a lot to digest there, so we'll probably come back to the discussion and questions. I've got one question, and then I would like to ask, please, for BCVS staff to hang on for 5 minutes if you can after we stop recording, just for a little debrief. The question I have for you, Michael, is in the APM model and all the different models that you're drawing on here, is there a kind of map on a page of the process flow of planning a project? Because there are in certain models, and I'm less familiar with APM. So in Prince, you can see it all on a page, because we've talked a lot about all the different tools and controls. And for those new to project management, you probably had feels like it's going to explode right now. So it's quite useful to see the, you know, start to closure flow of all the different tasks, the controls, so you can, and you won't use all of them for a tiny project, but at least then you can make an informed choice about, is it appropriate for this project?
Yeah, I think the short answer to that is no, but I think it's a good question, because I think we need to have something like that in place that will help you as an aid memoir to all the different types of documents that you would complete as part of managing a project. Yeah, I don't think APM, top of my head, I can't think of where I've seen that, but I can have a look.
Prince 2 has one, so maybe we can translate it into non-Prince speak and recreate it if it doesn't.
Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
I think you had your hand.
Lucy, did you have your hand up for a second there?
I did. It's actually just as Andrew was saying, I think it'd be really good if you had sort of like inception project planning. I'm not quite sure, but you know, quality management, it'd just be really helpful. You've got all the stages of where you go through, so it was really just the same as you were discussing then.
Yeah, we'll have a look and see what we can find, and if there isn't, we might have to translate something like Andrew said. I can't remember seeing anything where it's all sort of on a one page. I've got the book here in front of me. Yeah, I know that could be really useful, and it's something we should. Yeah, we'll do that. Julie.
Yeah, sort of going on from that as well. Obviously you've shared some links of some specific Gantt chart examples, but I think for us as well at BCVS, obviously there's lots of us that are either been working on projects or new to projects. And I know this will be something that Andrew wants to, you know, to talk to us about, is about kind of looking at what templates, and then we're all then going to use exactly the same template, and we all using the same method, the same tools, the same techniques, whatever project we're working on.
We've done that within Inspire only recently. I think we're about 6 years old now, Inspire, 6.5 years, and only recently have we come up with that documentation, and it isn't comprehensive either. It mostly covers the planning documentation, the initial, what Ian was talking about last week, the business case and the PID mostly. I don't think we actually have templates for the things that I've discussed with you today.
I've got most of them already from other lives, so we can repurpose them and have some kind of basic ones for BCVS, and then they will need to be tailored for each project or each area of work. You know, I like a plan. I've got all sorts of tools.
What I find really useful, I did want to spend a little bit of time on this actually, but we've not got the time, but Microsoft Planner. Don't know if anybody uses it. Just started to use it recently, and it comes with 365. I won't say too much because I don't know how much Andrea wants you to use these tools, but I found it really useful, Microsoft Planner, and it essentially is a project management package, but without the bells and whistles, all in one place, where you can bring different collaborators into it and set out different tasks.
I've not used Planner, I've used Project, but that's very much built around the Prince2 methodology.
Yeah.
Project, so maybe it's a newer version or something different, but we can certainly consider what's.
I think Project is a lot more in depth than Planner. Planner's more of a basic project management tool.
Okay.
Yeah.
Maybe we should look at that then. Brilliant. I'm going to press stop recording, but thank you very much for your time, Michael.
That's all right.
It was no small challenge to fit all of that into 2.5 hours, so thank you very much.
That's all right. Thank you, everyone. Nice to meet you all, and good luck with the rest of the course.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks for explaining it. Thanks.
Thank
Bye.
you.